大家好，我是 Martin, and this is Short Stories, brought to you by the Taichung Keda Language Center. Today's short story is called A Father's Heart. It's a story about a woman who lost her father, but still managed to have him present at her wedding, or at least a very small part of him. This story about a organ transplant and a wedding is guaranteed to touch your heart. It's very heartwarming. Haha. Anyway, before I tell you the story, I'm going to give you the vocabulary and vocabulary example sentences. Once I am finished with the story, I will read 4 listening comprehension questions to see if you were listening. Okay, let's get started. Vocabulary. Receive. Receive. Kevin received a parcel sent from his old friend who works in Argentina. Transplant. Transplant. Johnny will die if he doesn't have a kidney transplant soon. Emotional. Emotional. My mom became emotional upon reading the card I sent her. Dramatic. Dramatic. Peter made an impassioned and dramatic speech. Sentimental. Sentimental. Tom becomes talkative and slightly sentimental when he gets drunk. Critically. Critically. The boy was critically injured in a car accident. Senselessly. Senselessly. The hunter senselessly shot the endangered animal. Permit. Permit. Our landlord doesn't permit pets in the apartment. Pledge to. Pledge to do something. The rich man pledged to give all of his money to charity when he dies. Hinge on something. Hinge on something. The problem hinges on the woman's inability to accept that her son is a thief. Okay, vocabulary is now completed. Now we will begin the story. A bride is walked down the aisle by the man who received her father's heart. It's not difficult to imagine a touching and heartwarming story when the subject matter involves a fatherless bride-to-be, a man near death, a fateful murder, and a life-saving organ transplant. The true story that follows would be no less emotional if it had been written as a dramatic and sentimental Hollywood screenplay. This one will have you crying, but not from sadness. Nearly a decade ago, a New Jersey father of 4 had only days to live as he lay helplessly in a hospital bed with a critically failing heart. Arthur Thomas's only hope for survival hinged on receiving a last-minute heart transplant, but none seemed forthcoming. That was until one fateful night when a restaurant chef and father was senselessly murdered as he walked home from his job. The murdered man had pledged to donate his organs through an organization called Center for Organ Recovery and Education, or CORE. This man's tragic death proved to be a life-saving event for Thomas. Thomas was awarded the donor's heart and received a successful transplant. Almost 10 years later, Ginny Stapien of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the deceased man's daughter, was planning her wedding. Of course, there was the problem of who would walk Ginny down the aisle, since her father had long ago departed this world. Ginny had the exhilarating idea that she might be able to have a physical piece of her father present at her wedding. With her fiancé's encouragement, Ginny wrote a letter to Thomas, requesting he walk her down the aisle. A request he quickly accepted. The unsung hero of the story is CORE. The organization permits donor families and recipients to stay in touch, making communication possible between the two parties. Okay, now that we have finished the story, we can begin the questions. Number 1. What organ did Arthur Thomas need to live? A heart. B, a liver. C, a kidney. D, a lung. The answer is, of course, A, a heart. Question 2. What does CORE stand for? A, Center for Organ Recovery and Education. B, Center for Orange Rodents and Elephants. C, Cats, Octopi, Rabbits, and Eels. D, Can orangutans really educate? The answer is, of course, A, Center for Organ Recovery and Education. Question 3. What happened to Ginny Stapien's father? A, he received a heart transplant. B, he was murdered. C, he was fired. D, he started the CORE organization. The answer is B, he was murdered. Remember, Stapien's father, Stapien is the bride, her father was murdered, and his heart was donated to Arthur Thomas. So, Stapien's father was murdered is the answer, B. Question 4. Who walked Ginny down the aisle? A, Ginny's father. B, Ginny's brother. C, Arthur Thomas. D, Pittsburgh. Well, we know it's not A. Ginny's father was murdered, so he can't walk her down the aisle unless he's a ghost. The answer is C, Arthur Thomas, the man who received Ginny's father's heart. Okay, so that's the end of today's story. Are any of you crying a little bit out there? Okay, probably not. It's a very short story. Doesn't really build up the emotion at all. But it's a nice sentimental story about a man whose death managed to save someone else's life, and how these two families are now connected by that. I think that's a very nice story. Well, thank you all for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.